The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lisa Falcone, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Vivantio. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about how ITSM unifies entire organizations. Our speakers for today's presentation will be David Wright, Jeff Rumburg, and Scarlett Bayes. Our first speaker for today will be David Wright. He's the Chief Value and Innovation Officer at the Service Desk Institute. David brings 20 years experience in business process outsourcing and IT outsourcing and has worked at SDI since 2014. Our second speaker for the presentation today will be Jeff Rumburg. He is the co-founder and managing partner of MetricNet LLC and is a leading expert in benchmarking and re-engineering. He has authored best-selling books on benchmarking and has been retained as an expert in this field by a number of Fortune 500 companies. He has also been named amongst HDI's top 25 thought leaders in technical support and service management for 2016 and 17, where he has served on HDI's strategic advisory board. And our third and final speaker for this afternoon or morning, depending where you are, Scarlett is an Scarlett Bayes, industry analyst at SDI, where she is dedicated to providing insightful and practical research to the service desk industry through investigating trends, analyzing data, and engaging with the IT service community. She regularly presents insights based on her research findings at industry events and conferences, and shares her thoughts on trends and hot topics on the SDI blog. Before I introduce you to our first speaker today and kick off the webinar, just want to kindly remind everyone that there will be a recording of this broadcast shortly afterwards. Specifically, we'll be sending a link of the video recording, and it will include both the audio and presentation slides. And to keep the webinar as interactive and fun as possible, we will be holding 2 polling questions during the presentation, as well as a Q&A at the end, so get ready for that. So we encourage you to ask questions, and to do so, simply type your question in the box just below the presentation panel, labeled Ask a Question Anytime. So it looks like our first speaker is ready to go, and I'm going to hand that off to David Wright. Go ahead, David. You're ready.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to be part of today. Just let me click that, and hopefully you can see my screen there. So yeah, thank you very much indeed, and it's great to have everybody join us today. And I think this is a really interesting topic that we're going to be covering today. The opportunity to unify the organization through innovation and service management practices that have been developed over many years in IT. And certainly, in my experience, many parts of an organization could significantly benefit from processes, tools, and technologies that may have been designed as organizational enablers by IT, but maybe haven't been harnessed to their fullest potential that could bring exponential enabling benefits in an operational and service capacity across the whole enterprise, changing the way an organization enacts and manages business processes systematically, almost organically, to join up an enterprise, breaking down those silos and effectively aligning verticals and business strategies and helping to turn those into business reality. So let's start with a definition of innovation, just to remind ourselves what that actually is. So innovation is about better solutions. It's about more effective products, more effective processes, services, technologies, and business models. And innovation is also about originality, new, and effectiveness. And some key words to describe innovation, well, they include change, alteration, revolution, upheaval, transformation, which is a very well-used term at the moment, isn't it? These days, digital transformation, metamorphosis, reorganization, restructure, remodeling, disruption, all words that encapsulate what innovation is. And certainly, we've seen through our history as a species that innovation has helped us to become what we are right now. And more recently, as new technologies and new business models have emerged through disruptive digital innovation, we've seen a seismic shift in the way innovation is reshaping our very existence. The way our species has innovated through our evolution, not only to create new tools, but also how we adapted tools has actually helped shape us. And that's a profound quote there by a Canadian professor and philosopher, Marshall McLuhan. We made the tools, and then the tools made us. And if you look at that in context to the relationship between IT and an organization, it certainly resonates and brings home the fundamental need for innovation to ensure an organization continues to evolve, improve, adapt, and transform, adapting tools, principles, practices, and capabilities to be better. Now, there are some considerations that I'll cover off here related to innovation, and creativity is a cultural concept that organizations should really consider as part of being innovative or sparking innovation. And we'll just cover off some of these considerations here and how these maybe can help to promote innovation in an organization. And if you consider these in line with that focus on how IT service management could unify an organization, I think that would make more sense. So yeah, initially purpose, creating a purpose. Purpose, we all know, is a prime factor. It's a prime factor for all decision making. So for example, a defined strategy, mission, and vision statements that help to provide an organization with purpose and act as guiding lights or something to refer to and align innovation with. The next one there, looking from inside to outside. And that means encouraging a philosophy of outward looking rather than inward looking, not only beyond your own department or business unit, but out into the world beyond your organization to see different perspectives from your industry and other industries. Why? Well, because multiple perspectives are your friends. There's more than one way to do stuff, and an organization with a blinkered single perspective is more likely to become an extinct organization. So observing how other people deal with the same issues that you deal with through looking outside is a good way to discover different perspectives and innovate. Experimentation, so when there's a problem to solve, the challenge to come up with more than one idea. And you could do that by challenging people in an organization to come up with at least 3 ideas to solve an issue. Don't be satisfied with going with that first idea, because it's those 3 ideas scaled by other people, also creating 3 ideas across the organization that's going to be presented into management teams and shared cross-functionally to be assessed and get feedback on. And you know what? These days, just one idea just isn't enough anymore, just doesn't stimulate innovation. Collaboration, and that doesn't mean collaboration on a project or with people in your teams. It's more about crowdsourcing relationships and networks, again, to look for new multiple perspectives and that means collaborating with other teams, with your customers, with your suppliers, as well as organizations, wider networks and communities. So, you know, it's really good, I think, to assess how diverse your individual collaboration network is, because it's that diversity that's going to create diverse solutions and stimulate diverse innovation. Empowerment, and in this case, empowering through communication, so communication progress back to everyone who's touched the work to innovate, all those crowdsourced collaborators who've inputted. And this empowerment through communication can help to distribute problems that are being addressed through innovation engagement to make sure that those problems are not only solved, but resolved by your collaboration network using their ideas, their relevance and expertise, however intangible their relevance or expertise may be in relation to what you're trying to achieve. And finally, their refinement. And that's through creating some guiding principles, maybe 5 or 6 guiding principles to share with your team that will help to support decision-making that comes from innovation engagement. Having some agreed guiding principles will help to provide structure when ideas are assessed. And when you have these principles, you can go back to them to support decisions and contribute to refining your ideas based on the guiding principles. And just to extend that last point around refinement, maybe a good example of guiding principles are seen in our industry, in ITIL, in best practice, and actually ITIL practitioner. ITIL 4 may also have or introduce guiding principles similar to the ones that we see in ITIL practitioner. So let's take a quick look at those ITIL practitioner guidelines or guiding principles and think about how similar principles could support innovations and that refinement configuration. So we have some good transferable principles here, principles that not only form the basis of being an IT practitioner, but principles that also help to act to shape innovation outcomes across an organization, led by IT service management, and again, helping to unify an organization, and be that in an operational sense or through innovation engagement. We're going to pick out just a few of these, maybe, that could relate to innovation. Absolutely, the first one there, focus on value. Ensuring the understanding at an organization level that everything that you do in an organization should be based on maximizing the value for internal and external customers. A really good innovation design principle as well as a practitioner principle. Design for experience, yeah, a good principle that again supports refining innovations, thinking about the resulting customer experience, and when innovating, how to deliver an excellent customer experience, or at the very least, improving that experience, as certainly innovation really shouldn't be helping to make a worse customer experience. Working holistically there, yes, another good principle to encourage wider organizational perspectives, how innovation should support value chains and how it all fits together across an organization. Obviously, that helps to bring an organization together and helps to break down silos when bringing innovation into the rest of the organization. Transparency, absolutely, a really good design principle to make sure everyone knows what's happening. And maybe finally there we look at collaboration. We've already touched on it, we've already highlighted that, and it certainly fits with transparency, working holistically, and the customer experience, along with breaking down silos when promoting innovation engagement and the outcomes from innovation. So some good examples there maybe of guiding principles to help continually refine innovation outcomes. Now, it's very clear to see that innovation is crucial to the continuing success of an organization. And as we've seen over recent years through the disruptive effect of innovation, organizations who fail to understand market trends, consumer trends, market needs, consumer needs, they are also the ones who fail to prioritize innovation, and they're the ones who end up failing themselves. And some obvious winners and losers there include, obviously, Netflix, Blockbusters, Kodak, Uber, and Amazon. And Amazon actually is a really great example of an organization getting innovation right. Between 2006 and 2016, Amazon shares increased by almost 2,000%. And over that time, it's aligned its business model, its business strategy, its products, the customer experience, and the organizational structure, and out-innovated everyone in the market. Now, I'm not saying that innovation from IT service management into the business will show the same results as that in any organization, but there is certainly an opportunity to encourage better outcomes and realize wider business benefits through innovation. And if IT service management mobilizes to support an organization becoming more innovative, in turn, they help to ensure the organization is there for the longer term and doesn't become the next Blockbusters. You know, there's an awful lot of talk around at the moment about the fourth industrial revolution and its impact. And I think the key there is it's the fourth time it's happened. So it's happened before. There are lessons to be learned from previous innovation revolutions and see who the winners and losers were and why. Okay, so that's some quick thoughts about innovation. Now, before we go any further, Lisa, I think we've got a listener's poll in relation to innovation that you'll be managing there. We've got a question for you to answer, guys, if you could, which is, how innovative is your organization? It's as simple as that, really. And we'd like you to take a few seconds to select the nearest answer that you think your organization sort of, is, right? Yeah. So we're going to close this very soon, guys. If you could start to click those little boxes, pick out which one you think is closest to your organization, and then we'll close the poll soon. Are we okay for numbers, Lisa? Does that look okay?
Yeah, we're starting to stream it. I'll just give them a few additional seconds.
Good. Thank you for that. Okay, guys, we're probably going to give it another 10 seconds. So if you could just give it a click, that would be great. And if we could look to close now, Lisa, that'd be fantastic. So let's see what we've got there. Okay, that's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. Now, I didn't know what we'd get from this, but I certainly didn't see 5%. I thought that 5% would be a bit more. You can see the obvious winner there is that we try to, but it's really, really challenging. And obviously that 26% top end, which is great to see that actually innovation is embraced by the organization. Okay, really cool stats there. Now, we're going to move on, I think, to Jeff. So I think, Jeff, hopefully you're ready to offer your thoughts.
Absolutely, David. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those prescient remarks.
Thank you, Jeff, and looking forward to your content. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking for a screen share prompt here. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, that looks good. If we can just put that to full screen, Jeff, that would be great.
Okay, there we go. Following on the heels of David's remarks, one of the advantages I find in working in the benchmarking field is that we get to see a lot of data from the IT service and support organizations that we benchmark. And this gives us what I would call a bird's eye view, or a ringside seat, if you will, into how the industry is dynamically changing over time. And when it comes to innovation, one of the mega trends that we've identified in service and support is the enterprise service desk. And simply defined, an enterprise service desk is a single point of contact for all internal enterprise services. So think of an IT service desk on steroids that supports not only IT, but facilities, human resources, legal, payroll, and any other internal service. So imagine being able to call one number or to click one button on your phone or computer to access all enterprise services. If you're locked out of the parking garage on a weekend, you lose your ID badge, or you can't get your computer to boot up, or you're filing for a leave of absence, there's just one number to call. And regardless of the nature of your issue, HR, IT, facilities, security, you receive prompt, consistent, high-quality service. And what I'm describing is the enterprise service desk, a single point of contact for all enterprise services. And it's no longer just a hypothetical pipe dream. It's here now, emerging in enterprises worldwide. Now, any internal service provider is a candidate for enterprise services. And much like contacts in IT service and support fall into two broad categories, you've got incidents, unplanned work, and you've got service requests, typically planned work. The same is true for enterprise services. So for example, if you've spent any time in an HR call center or a facilities department, you've probably concluded that their customer service processes and procedures are ad hoc at best. But you've also undoubtedly seen the parallels between the work they do for customer support and the work that goes on in IT service and support. In fact, I'll submit that the only real difference between the customer service provided by HR and the customer service provided by IT is the obvious one: non-technical support versus technical support. Now, aside from that relatively minor detail, and it really is a minor detail, virtually everything that goes on in IT service and support can be adopted virtually unchanged by other enterprise services. This is one very common form of innovation. Now, I first heard the term Chief Service Officer in about 2012 when I was working on a service desk benchmark for one of America's largest insurance companies. And I asked what a Chief Service Officer was. And the person that I was working with said, well, she heads up the enterprise service desk. She's in charge of customer service for IT, claims, HR, payroll, facilities, and regulatory compliance. And for me, it was a real kind of an aha moment. The light bulb went on, and it changed my perspective on service and support forever. And since then, companies large and small worldwide have embraced this idea of enterprise services. Moreover, I've come to believe that this industry megatrend represents perhaps the greatest opportunity in a generation for the IT service and support industry, not just for innovation, but for your professional careers. If you're an IT support professional and have longed to play a bigger role on a bigger stage to make a significant impact on the success of your enterprise, this is that opportunity. It's finally here. It's the enterprise service desk. Now, who's doing it? Well, the empirical data based on our observations, doing hundreds of benchmarks per year, shows that approximately 10% of the Fortune 1000, the largest 1,000 corporations in North America, already have mature enterprise service desks. Another 20% of the Fortune 1000 have made a full commitment to the enterprise service desk and are in transition. Another 70% know about it. They're planning to adopt an enterprise service desk model in the future, but they have yet to begin the transformation. Now, my own belief is that within a decade, all but a handful of holdout companies will have mature enterprise service desks. The benefits are just too overwhelming to ignore. Now, we're already very close to a tipping point where businesses are shifting away from why would we do this to why haven't we done this? Now, IT service and support has been evolving in an industry for more than 50 years. ITSM is a 50-year-old discipline now. The same cannot be said of other enterprise services, such as HR and facilities and the myriad other internal functions run from an organization. And herein lies the value proposition of enterprise services. By leveraging 50 years of knowledge, experience, and expertise in IT service and support, other enterprise services such as HR and facilities and security, legal services, office management, payroll, finance, logistics, and sales, you have an opportunity to bypass decades of trial and error evolutionary improvement by building upon the proven best practices of IT service management. It's a simple idea, but one that has profound consequences for IT services and the enterprises that they serve. Now, you've probably heard the phrase, better, faster, cheaper. It's a pithy way of describing the benefits of continuous improvement. Now, it sounds like a cliche, but there's real truth behind this catchphrase. Better means higher quality, faster means quicker fulfillment or transaction times, and cheaper means lower cost per transaction or lower cost per ticket. Now, cost, quality, and cycle time are, in fact, the three dimensions of competition. And any valid business case must demonstrate measurable benefits in one or more of those three dimensions. Enterprise services are being adopted worldwide, not just because there's a mature IT service management model to follow, but because the economics of enterprise services make sense. Numerous examples from my own experience comparing the before and after for organizations that adopt an enterprise service desk provide pretty compelling evidence of cost, quality, and cycle time benefits. We know, for example, that enterprise services benefit from scale economies, as illustrated in this chart. The approximate cost curve is 7%, and what that means is that every doubling of contact or ticket volume in enterprise services results in an approximate 7% reduction in cost per unit of work, whether that's measured as cost per ticket or cost per contact. Now, aside from the economic advantages of enterprise services, the opportunity to offer a consistent high-quality experience to all enterprise service customers is another huge advantage. The ability to adopt, implement, and maintain best practices is a lot easier in a consolidated enterprise support model. Providing that SPOC, single point of contact, the focus to help avoid managing across multiple disparate queues, an HR queue, a payroll queue, a facilities queue, a security queue. And the organization moves down a collective learning curve much faster and more effectively, thereby achieving higher performance across multiple queues within the organization. Now, just think for a moment about what IT service and support has to offer non-IT enterprise services. A short list is likely to include idle processes, such as incident, problem, and knowledge management. Why can't you apply those to non-IT? We call it idle, but they don't have to be applied to IT processes. The same incident management processes, problem management, and knowledge management can be applied to any other enterprise service. Think of standard operating procedures, process flows and documentation, service level and operating level agreements, metrics and reporting templates, shift left strategies, multi-channel support, self-help, self-service, recruiting, hiring, and training practices, workforce scheduling, technology such as ITSM, knowledge and remote control tools, expertise in knowledge management, and call quality tools. This is just a short list of some of the technologies that have matured in the ITSM environment. So why would any non-IT service want to reinvent the wheel when they can leverage decades of institutional knowledge embodied in IT service and support? The very essence of enterprise services involves adopting the more mature practices of IT service management. This short circuits, if you will, an otherwise evolutionary process. So what took IT service and support decades to achieve can be accomplished in a matter of months by non-IT services that are willing to adopt and adapt the proven best practices of IT service management. Ultimately, what you bring to the table is business value and experience that doesn't exist elsewhere in the enterprise. This includes technology and processes, metrics. Think of things like first contact resolution rate, or cost per ticket, or net promoter score, or mean time to resolve. These are metrics that non-IT services within the enterprise are not familiar with. Frameworks, the ITIL framework, training practices, your experience and know-how, best practices, ultimately what you bring to the table is 50 years of knowledge and collective experience that can benefit the enterprise. Now, those who are undergoing the transformation to enterprise services typically cite a number of common benefits from enterprise services. A one-stop shop for end users. I gave you an example earlier. You click one button on your computer or you call one phone number for anything related to the organization. Shared infrastructure, shared network, shared ticketing tools. These improve customer satisfaction and efficiency. Company-wide productivity improves. And let me digress just a moment here and say that the single biggest contribution, economic contribution that service and support makes to the organization is that you make end users more productive. That can be true, not just in IT, but also in non-IT services. You return productive hours to your end users, to your internal customers, and this can be quantified, and we can put an ROI on that. And improve visibility into the value you create and your ROI, better communication and collaboration across different disciplines, different internal services, standardized processes, procedures, technologies, potential for cross-training. You don't have to just be an IT technician or agent or analyst. You can be cross-trained to work in multiple different queues, thereby getting better scale economies from the organization. And then mature performance diagnostics. Think about the cause and effect relationships of the KPIs and understanding what drives customer satisfaction, what drives cost, what drives your first contact resolution rate, what drives your mean time to resolve. Now, I'm going to transfer the screen back to David and Lisa, who are going to administer our second poll today. But as I'm doing that, I want to leave you with a few closing remarks. You know, as a 30-year veteran of this industry, one of the things that's always troubled me is that IT service and support professionals rarely receive the rewards and recognition that they deserve. Many toil away in relative obscurity, oftentimes suffering, you know, the ire of customers when things don't go well, but rarely receiving praise when things do go well, which is the majority of the time. Now, if you've long dreamed of playing a bigger role on a bigger stage, Enterprise Service Desk is, in my opinion, that once-in-a-generation opportunity to really realize that opportunity, realize those dreams, and innovate within the organization. You have unique and valuable knowledge that your enterprise needs. So I encourage you to step up, offer your help, your experience, and your hard-won knowledge. And most of all, offer your leadership, because without it, the Enterprise Service Desk cannot succeed.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. That's really great. And it looks as if the poll has been running in the background, which is fantastic. So, Lisa, these are the end results from the poll?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's quite a balance across there, isn't there? There's quite a balance there, and it's good to see that, yes, indeed, 35% of the listeners have actually done that, which is great. Even better that it's actually been explored, and the minority, I suppose, when you look at the numbers there, is between no, we don't at 20, and actually don't even know, which is really, really interesting at 20 as well. Good, thank you for that, really appreciate it. Now then, we're going to move on to SDI's very own Scarlett, who I think, Scarlett, you've got some fantastic data to share in relation to the subject as well.
Yeah, I most certainly do. Can you tell me if you can see my screen?
I will indeed, yeah, here it comes, there we are. And I think it's full screen as well, Scarlett, so fantastic, thank you. Over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Dave. And Jeff, you gave us a really good overview of ESM and the benefits that organisations are seeing from it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through some data that SDI has collected surrounding ESM. And first, I want to touch on some of the main findings, which I found particularly interesting from the report. So firstly, 58% of respondents identified that their service desk receives 3% or more of calls which are intended for another desk. And the time spent answering misplaced calls is a frustrating waste of time for both the service desk and customers. So creating a single point of contact for all business-related issues would ultimately reduce the amount of time wasted on erroneous calls to the service desk. Secondly, we know that 34% more service desks are practicing ESM than in 2015. And in fact, more recent SDI data suggests that this number is on the rise. As Jeff mentioned, there are numerous benefits to practicing ESM, but it's important to note that there are several layers to ESM, and you don't have to physically merge service desks to actually be practicing some form of it and realizing those benefits. So a lot of the data will look at the difference between the perceptions of ESM, so what service desk professionals who specified that they aren't practicing ESM think the motivations or obstacles, etc., are of ESM, versus what professionals whose service desks are practicing ESM have actually experienced with their model. I think it's important to compare those two, as it could dispel the fears or misconceptions that some people have, or indeed confirm some of the preconceptions. And having said that, it's important to note that every service desk's experience and journey will be different. So with that preface, the next main finding was that politics and different ways of working were two of the biggest perceived obstacles of ESM. So already we can see that a lot of service desks would expect to run into problems which are based on culture more than infrastructure, which can actually be a major barrier to many projects for the service desk, but it's still possible to overcome them. I briefly mentioned that there are stages or layers to ESM, and for the service desk which are practicing ESM, the most common stage of collaboration is a shared service management tool. Most service management departments within an organization, such as HR and facilities, perform a large quantity of repetitive tasks similar to the IT service desk. Alongside reducing costs of licensing and maintaining multiple tools, implementing an ITSM tool that has ESM capabilities makes more economic sense, as well as improving interdepartmental communication. Lastly, only 33% of respondents that specified their organization was not currently practicing ESM are sharing nothing. So that means that 67% of service desks are actually practicing some form of ESM without actually realizing it, which I think is a pretty astounding figure. So as I said, our data shows that 66% of organizations are practicing some form of ESM, which is up from just 32% in 2015. This statistic is incredibly significant, as it shows that the adoption rate for ESM has increased at an incredibly fast rate, having more than doubled in just 2 years. And other SDI data shows that 70% of digital transformation projects involve a shared services approach, which suggests that the proportion of service desks practicing ESM is on the rise. I mentioned before that nearly 70% of organizations are doing some form of ESM without realizing it. The most common stage of collaboration for both groups of respondents is a shared service management tool, followed by shared service desk team, and then shared processes across the business. I mentioned already that the benefits of a shared tool, but a shared service desk team can reduce costs in terms of resources and physical space needed, and it can also lead to greater efficiency across all back office functions, because tickets for different departments can be dealt with by any member of the shared service desk team, or it can be passed to the best analyst for the job much faster. In terms of shared processes, each support desk will deal with incidents or requests in a similar way and probably carry out a lot of the same actions like reporting or collecting customer feedback. So it makes sense that these processes are merged to make them more streamlined and efficient by taking the best parts from each department. So moving on to the motivations of ESM, both perceived and realized, we can see that for organizations that are practicing ESM, the improved quality of services for customers is paramount. And this was identified as the second most compelling motivation for organizations not currently practicing ESM. This is a very positive sign, because it shows that for these organizations, their customers are at the center of their service, and it's what motivates them most. For the most part, the perceptions of the main reasons to merge services and processes match up with the actual influences. And that's quite positive, as it shows that organizations have a reasonable understanding of the benefits they could realize with ESM. I think one of the main observations here is that the companies currently practicing ESM seem to largely focus on the benefits and impacts of ESM for the customer, such as meeting customer demand, service quality, and general efficiency, more so than the respondents whose companies do not currently practice ESM, where cost savings was identified as the main motivator. 39% of organizations practicing ESM and 25% of those who are not specified workload reduction as a main reason to merge services and processes. And if we take a look at the volume of calls that were meant for another desk, we can see that over half of service desks receive less than 3% of misplaced calls, which means that over 40% of service desks are receiving up to 12% of calls which are meant for another support service. The business impact of this can be significant if such a large number of calls end up being redirected to other desks. With a percentage of erroneous calls going to the service desk, staff and resource efficiencies would be impacted with little benefit to the organization. And it's likely that redirecting customers to another desk can have an impact on their experience. In terms of the obstacles of practicing ESM, the most significant challenges are considered to be those related to the differences between departments within a business and different ways of working and culture differences, cited by 75% and 50% of organizations practicing ESM respectively. In comparison, politics is a significantly less substantial obstacle for real applications of ESM, which could mean that there is potential for organizations which want to share services, processes, and/or tools, but are concerned that politics will get in the way to overcome this barrier. Interestingly, a higher percentage of ESM respondents have identified tooling features as an obstacle to ESM. Some ITSM tool vendors have realized a way to expand their product, which allows their tools flexibility and the ability to be used by other areas of the business. Therefore, many ITSM tools now have ESM capabilities, and as multiple departments within an organization also perform a large quantity of repetitive tasks, tools shouldn't struggle with a capability in this sense. But depending on the size of the company and the task performed by individual departments, the capabilities of an ITSM tool may not be fully adequate. It's certainly worth shopping around and trying to find a tool vendor which is able to meet your needs in terms of functionality and ongoing support, or talking to your current tool provider to see if they can offer something which meets your needs. An indicator of the success of an ESM model can have is to ask customers practicing ESM how well it's working for them. So that's what we did, and 100% of respondents rated their ESM application a 5 or above, with over 60% rating an 8 or more. So perhaps this is an indicator that the challenges or obstacles can be overcome and can result in a successful ESM initiative. So I want to leave you with a peek into the future, mostly what we could expect the uptake of ESM to look like in the near future. The proportion of respondents who identified that their business plans to merge desks or share services has increased since 2015 from 49% to 59%, with the majority of organizations looking to do so within the next 3 years. Interestingly, 17% of respondents identified that their organizations would move to an ESM framework within the next 6 months, showing that an increased number of businesses will be practicing ESM in the very near future. Furthermore, the increase in this statistic since 2015 demonstrates that ESM is growing in uptake, and therefore it's likely that organizations will begin to adopt ESM at a much faster rate. The last thing I want to touch on is the fact that a significant proportion of organizations are practicing some form of ESM without realizing it. If we consider ESM as a journey, 67% of service desks have started this journey without fully knowing. And the journey will be different depending on the industry or organization. And so there's no definitive endpoint, because for one service desk, it could be a shared service desk team, but for another, it could be sharing processes. So there's understandably some confusion around what ESM actually is, but hopefully as there's more and more focus around ESM within the industry, both in terms of the proportion of organizations practicing it and the amount of knowledge and information industry professionals share, will start to piece together a more solid definition of what ESM is.
Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Some really brilliant sort of data and a great sort of overview. I think with that, Lisa, we're back to you for some Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Scarlett, David, and Jeff, to all of our speakers on the webinar today. Really appreciate the great content you've presented. Lots of really good tangible ones, I think, that people can put into practice, into their company. So to all those attending and listening in on our webinar, if you haven't had the opportunity to insert the questions that you have for our speakers today, You can do so now by typing in your questions below the Ask a Question box in the panel to your right. So we do have a couple of questions coming in immediately here, so I'll go ahead and address them now. I'll open it up to any and all of the speakers on the presentation. So the first one is, how does an organization actually get started with the transformation to enterprise service?
That's a good question, isn't it? I mean, I'll start, I suppose. I mean, you know, what we see is organizations who, some of the better ones have got very defined strategies on what they're trying to achieve as an organization. And that definition creates clarity in the form of success factors and KPIs that are then driven into the organization, practiced by the organization to deliver these types of things. So I think certainly having the definition around what you're trying to achieve as an organization absolutely is an enabler in the same way that technology is. So you couple that with the right tools, the right strategy, then hopefully, you know, getting the people on board. I think that's a key thing as well to consider, is the cultural changes required in an organization to make some of this happen. But that's the same with everything that you try and change, you know. So I think that is, you know, I think we could probably have a webinar just on that question alone, I think. Jeff, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, David, you know, to build on your points, if you're starting from scratch, one of the things you can do is circulate this presentation to build a common understanding of what an enterprise service desk entails. The second thing you can do is get your own house in order. You know, if you're still struggling as a reactive firefighting support organization, you're probably in no position to lead on enterprise services. By contrast, if you have a relatively mature service desk or service and support organization with relatively strong performance, I would argue that you have an obligation to lead on enterprise services. Now, once the idea of enterprise services is broadly understood within the organization, you need an executive champion, in my opinion. Ideally, this should be the CIO, but a COO or a COO or some other senior leader can be an equally effective champion for enterprise services. Next, you look for volunteers, and by that I mean you identify a service that is willing to accept your help and leadership in adopting and adapting mature IT support processes in their own functional area. In the early stages, it's crucial to accept volunteers rather than force any part of the organization to accept an enterprise service model, because this is not a land grab, and you can avoid any appearance of heavy-handedness by making participation in the enterprise service desk voluntary. Start with a smaller function like facility, safety, or regulatory compliance. These are typically easier to integrate into an enterprise service desk than a large high visibility function like HR. You want to ensure that your first integrations are successful, and this in turn will help convince those who may be skeptical of enterprise services that they have much to gain by participating.
And do you know what, Jeff? We work with some amazing organizations, and you're absolutely right in what you said there. You know, and we get a chance to look at really diverse services in public sector, private sector, in commercials, in not-for-profit, and you're absolutely right. You know, I can think of a few quite surprising moments in organizations, right? One of which, as in out of interest, one of which was a guy, a leader in a service desk environment, understand the benefits of what this approach could bring his organization, and kicking down doors, promoting it and kicking down doors until the organization understood what the benefits were. Because I think until you uncover what the benefits are and you realize them, then you don't get that sort of light bulb moment. And he explained, so he was setting up some automation around process management for another department, and he told me that he'd been into the HR department and he'd explained, you know, what that could offer them, you know, and he talked about sort of process management and stuff like that and all this wonderful stuff. And honestly, the answer he got back was, what are processes? And I tell no lie, that is actually what these guys came back and said. Now, if you look at that innovation thing and what enterprise service management can bring an organization, you know, you're going to find different layers, I suppose, different levels of what that means in any organization. I think certainly, You know, if you've got a champion, a key stakeholder, whatever you want to call it, that can actually push that into an organization, understanding all that we've seen already, but also understanding some of the stuff we saw earlier about the value of innovation and how to innovate, that crowdsourcing thing, creating networks within an organization. There are things you can actually do strategically to support that and make it grow. What's interesting, I think, for me, is seeing 50% of organizations trying to be innovative in an earlier poll, but failing to because work's getting in the way. And it's really interesting because obviously, if you look at the way that IT solutions are going with automation and with sort of AI and with self-service and shift and left, I mean, all that can be taken into the organization to take away all that more superfluous workload to create more time for innovation. Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, actually, one which we could probably deliberate on all day, to be honest.
Thank you so much. Another interesting question coming in here. So for any and all of you, how do you merge or implement an enterprise service management structure when different countries or languages exist? What kind of staffing do you see being needed or dedicated resources?
Yeah, really good question again. Do you know, again, we get a chance to see loads of different organizations. And if you look at some of the stats that we pulled out, not only of our research data, but also from our certification program data, we see a lot of organizations, the leading organizations that are doing the best in some of this stuff and actually best in serviceability come from the outsourcing and managed service sort of area. And when you look at that, as a model, when you look at a 24/7 service, when you look at a model of global sort of multilingual, always on, you know, follow the sun model, there are models out there already and case studies out there already how organizations have fundamentally changed to do that. And not only doing that, you know, not so much doing it themselves, but how their suppliers have put together an ecosystem to support that happen. So it's a really great question, and I think that question around the cultures in different organizations or different parts of an organization internationally is the key answer there, really key answer. So when we're working with organizations that have got a shared service across India, across the Philippines, in the UK, in Germany, it's extraordinarily challenging to pull all that together into you know, a point the ship in one direction. There, again, we could talk about this one all day. Jeff, I'm going to ramble on all day myself, I suppose. Anybody else want to say anything on that one, actually?
You know, if this is Jeff Rumburg, if you've done this with IT, if you're supporting a global enterprise and you have support hubs or support locations in different parts of the world, then that it's really no different than providing these enterprise services in different parts of the world. But I'll go back to a point I made earlier, which is that you've got to get your own house in order before you can serve as an example and take best practices from IT service and support and apply them to non-IT services on a global scale across a lot of different geographies, languages, and so on. You've got to make sure that you have your own act together. You've got to be mature with your processes. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you are both efficient and effective. Now, if you don't have that global IT model, it doesn't mean that you can't provide enterprise services across vast geographies, you know, on a global basis. Generally, organizations are very fragmented. Large multinationals and large global organizations are very fragmented, and what you find are pockets of human resource expertise, pockets of security, pockets of finance and security expertise throughout the organization. And the key is to figure out where it is. What's the head count? What are they doing? Which locations in the world are they doing it? And typically there's a huge economic opportunity in consolidation. So instead of having, you know, 300 locations worldwide that are performing some type of HR function, you consolidate into 4 global hubs, for example. That's a very common model that organizations will pursue when they go after enterprise services. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you have to provide customized service in every, you know, tiny nook and cranny of the globe. You don't have to support 45 different languages, and I use that example for a reason because I just worked with an organization in Copenhagen that was supporting, it's a global business, but they support 45 languages worldwide, and that makes no sense. Generally, you're going to want to support 3 to 5 languages, and the rest can be done through a chat interpreter. So you may be speaking English or some other language, but you can be speaking to somebody who is speaking in their native tongue, Tagalog, Malay, Korean or some other language, and a chat interpreter will effectively interpret between the two of you. So there are technologies that can assist in doing this on a global basis. If IT service and support has already done this on a global basis and they're performing well, they can serve as an example, a pathway, if you will, for what you need to do going forward. But typically what you're going to find as you expand enterprise services globally is that you're going to find a lot of pockets of service being provided throughout the organization, and the big opportunity is not just economic through consolidation, consolidating to regional hubs where you provide these enterprise services, but also providing that consistent high quality interface for customers throughout the enterprise so that they get a common experience and a common high quality experience when they call in for service and support in any area, IT or otherwise.
And do you know what, Jeff? I think there's a mental change in an organization, whatever size, I think, from understanding that IT is really about business solutions and service integration, not about break fix. You know, and I think it's funny because, you know, some of the data we've seen, that exponential change in this approach, enterprise approach since 2013 that Scarlett mentioned is incredible. So I think it is about that as well. I think it's understanding that IT isn't IT. It's not IT. It's more than IT. It's service integration and it's business solutions to make the organization, to support the organization's innovation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes here, but I thought this question would be a great one to end with and broadly appealing to the audience. So wanted to throw this in here as well. One of our audience members asks, is it required that IT service desk reach a specific maturity level to begin an enterprise service management?
It's a really good question, isn't it? Do you know that one of the guiding principles actually that we talked about earlier was sort of, you know, start from where you are. I mean, there are ways to sort of understand and assess if you're in a position to really demonstrate that you can do that. It's a really good question. I think the sort of question back is, you know, why and how and those types of questions really, because each organization is going to be slightly different. But I think, yes, fundamentally, as Jeff has said, you need to have a consistently good service to mirror from, to take that, you know, the rest of the organization, wherever that part of the organization is. Jeff?
Yeah, David, you mentioned that there are some organizations that didn't even know what processes were. And so, although twice now I've said you've got to have your own house in order before you can do this, what you're going to find when you start moving in the direction of enterprise services is that even if you yourselves are relatively immature, you're light years ahead of these non-IT services. Think about the ticketing tools that you use, the ITSM tool. Chances are the other services in the organization don't have those tools. Think about your knowledge of metrics and your understanding of metrics, even if it's relatively immature, just knowing that cost per ticket and customer satisfaction are two critically important metrics, knowing about first contact resolution rate and mean time to resolve. Chances are these other enterprise services have never thought about those metrics. Think about the reporting templates you have. Think about the service level agreements that you have. So even though you might be relatively immature, chances are you still have a lot to offer these non-enterprise services. Certainly you want to come at this from a position of strength. It would be great to be able to claim that you're a world-class service and support organization, but you oftentimes don't have that luxury. So as David said, you start from where you are, and even if you're relatively immature, there are things that you bring to the table around metrics, around technology and tools, around reporting templates, service level agreements, and the like that are going to be really new to these non-IT services. As David mentioned, he was aware or gave us an example of an organization that didn't even know what processes were. So don't undersell yourselves. Chances are you have something to offer even if you yourselves are not as mature as you would like to be.
I'd also just like to add that, say for example that you're a service desk for a relatively new company and not very well established, that's probably one of the best times to begin the journey of creating an enterprise service desk, because you can grow together rather than waiting until you're a much larger company where every support function is more established. You can actually go in from the ground up and start to work together that way?
It's a great question, and unfortunately, so we have a bunch of new questions coming in, which is great to hear. But we do have to wrap up the presentation for today, guys. Thank you so much for speaking and educating our audience on ESM and how companies are extending service across the organization. So thank you once again. I do want to remind and encourage all of our listeners today to please send any questions that were not covered during today's webinar that you want to be addressed to myself, and I'd be happy to forward that on appropriately to our speakers. My email is lisa.falcone@vivantio.com, lisa.falcone@vivantio.com. So that just about wraps things up. Thank you once again to our audience and to our presenters. With that, we've reached the top of the hour. As mentioned earlier, you will receive an email shortly with a link to the video recording of this broadcast as well as the presentation slides. All right, thank you again.